Welcome to Explore, Explain, Highlights. In this Highlights package, we'll be looking at Season 3, Episode 1, with our guest, Andrea Lau, discussing the project COVID-19 Socio-Economic Recovery Data Insight Platform.
You would characteristically get a sense of the shape and the physicality and the number of discrete values and the range of values. And I guess you will have had to do that anyway to get a sense of, what's the highest number on this measure, because we have to create space for that, or we have to create a color ramp that will, cover that eventuality. So it does feel like you've almost had to avoid the temptation to get into the sort of semantic understanding of the data and just feel about, or see it almost as a mechanistic challenge, creating containers that then will feed the machine that you are ultimately developing. But I guess that will also be part and parcel of the relationship that you had with the subject matter experts that you spoke before, because they would have ultimately been the custodians and those responsible for, preparing, gathering and checking the data. And I suppose you have to just sort of keep a distance from even having to worry about that. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is totally fair. Unfortunate in the sense that we would like to extract some things. Like I was talking to Jack about what he would like to say, talking to you about this project. And he thinks that maybe it would have been good if we had time to go into further detail of very specific stories.
Right.
Like women in Bangladesh who have lost employment during COVID or something like that. And then reflecting data there and telling more of a story through those kind of lenses at a very kind of bottom up level.
Yeah.
Whereas everything that we did on this project was very top down, which, like I said, is great because we were able to cover a whole big set of data and be able to put them all in different places and change those drop downs and so forth. So that was very valuable. But it would have been nice if we had time and the opportunity to do some kind of bottom up and little stories.
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, it's I think it often comes down to your own almost self-discipline to not be too tempted to sort of draw into that stuff, because by nature you are communicators and data happens to be the medium that you are communicating with. But in this, I guess, needs most, you've got to get the thing kind of operational and functional. I mean, just speaking to the bivariate plot, I mean, it's a quite unorthodox colouring approach, and it's not always seen out there, and it's something that I've seen used quite badly in the past, where the colours just haven't been the kind of appropriate choices. I mean, is that something that they came to you and said, we think this might be an option, or did you essentially eliminate other options and say, well, this has to be the way forward? And therefore, how did you sell that approach to the UNDP?
It was actually our idea. It was a database designer Dasha's idea. And, off the back of what we were talking about and wanting to compare two things, that seemed like the natural approach. But we did, because there's only so much you can do on a map without it becoming overwhelming.
Sure.
And we didn't really have many. If we wanted to visualize three things at the same time, we didn't really have much choice.
That's
almost. But if we wanted to also maintain some consistency, so at some stage we said cases being circles overlaid on the top, we fixed that. That means no more stuff on the top. Or if we do put things over the top, that means we have to switch out cases for something else.
Yeah.
And so then it became, well, we have fill, we have stroke. Maybe we can't really use stroke because that's just all borders, because that's just too much. And it just fell to it that the idea of the bivariate worked, with the idea of like how we sold it to the client. Was that idea of, look, we can visualize these two things, and where they both end up really saturated or this particular color, that's where you have to concentrate on. And so I think they really liked, but they did have to be kind of brought around to it, but it didn't take too much convincing. I think they did like the idea, appreciate the thought behind it.
Well, I think there's two things there. There's the fact that you can demonstrate that there's a process of elimination, that there's nothing else we can do
Yes,
if we want to show
exactly.
this thing. So
Yep.
if you are anchoring that this thing is the thing to show, then we need to find the least worst way sometimes, let alone the best way. And as you said, you've used up the overlay. The region outlines are going to be too fiddly and invisible for very small countries, let alone the fact it might just look like a country outline anyway. So what you've got left is kind of opacity, you've got texture, and that just won't work as well because there isn't enough scope to do. So yeah, we've tried all options. This is what's left. But let me assure you, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, that if I teach you how to look at it, so concentrate on that top right corner, the most vivid blend of the two metrics, and look for those on the map. And so, yeah, you can coach people to train themselves to look at it. Because otherwise, people just blast onto the map and say, right, look at all these colours. No idea what's going on. Right. Tackle it in small chunks. Just look at bits by bit. And so, yeah, I do think it works.
And I was going back and trying to think of why we got to where we got to in terms of the map and the interface and things like that. And I was trying to figure out where the map idea came from in the first place. And actually, the client had already done some mock-ups.
Right.
So that's another thing, that it wasn't just, there's some inspiration out there. Here's the data. Here's what we want to achieve. But actually, we've thought about this a little bit already in the team, and this is what we think we kind of want. And we also want to do something in 2 weeks. So, so we kind of had to do it. But we did, because often when any kind of client comes in, or a potential client comes in with a preconceived notion or a solution, we try and challenge that. Or sometimes it feels like it's the natural fit, but sometimes we annoyingly, probably for some clients, go, do you really need a map? And they're like, yeah, actually, no. Or actually, what are you talking about? Yes, of course we need a map, kind of thing. So to your question about, finding inspiration, things like that, actually the client provided a lot of initial direction for this project.
You're right. I mean, I have chat to a few people on this on these episodes, and the ideas that come from clients can be met with both glee, oh terrific, you've done some thinking, but also, oh no, you've done some thinking. And and yeah, it doesn't always fit, but I think it's fine so long as they're all, as you said, they're open to be challenged. Does the where matter? Is it about the spatial dimension, or is it about the categorization? So yeah, I mean, it just starts a healthy dialogue. And I guess, as you said, if it's a kind of 2-week rush process, that any starting point that's been done, some thinking that's been done, can only help you kind of accelerate through that. Those contents, were they pretty much well established as the wish list of things to show people from the side of the client when they were approaching you, or did you feel yourselves that this had to be the extent of the things that you were going to show people?
I think it began as, I think each of them the client had ideas about at the very beginning. And as we got through the project in a bit more detail and understood the scope of the data, what we had to play with, started getting into line in terms of the structure that was laid out for each of the pillar heads, or the goal, the theme, people who were the domain experts for each theme to go through and fill out this structure. As we got that kind of more into rhythm, then this information architecture emerged from it. So the other thing that we talked about with the client, and they had an idea from the very beginning also, but isn't really shown from a user point of view, is underneath each goal are a bunch of questions.
Right.
That the map should answer, or the map in combination with a few things should answer. And so that isn't shown because the user doesn't need to know that. But that's how we arrived at those kind of default views of each of the map and so forth.
And so obviously one of the approaches that you've had to take this is pragmatism and reproducibility on a scale. Once again, kind of reflecting on things, and maybe this is both your reflections and potentially the client's reflections. Would you have ideally liked to have treated each theme or pillar and goal within that with very bespoke solutions in each one? And the fact that we've got a certain rhythm under each of the goals that we see was, again, a reasonable but pragmatic view to say, right, we need to find a way to scale all this up.
Yeah, I think if we were to do it again, it would probably end up very similar.
Right.
But like Jack's idea is that maybe there's more of an opportunity to tell those individual stories a little bit more. Yeah, because it's good that there's consistency between the themes, and there's an expectation as well from a user point of view that what they see in each one is what they get for the next one, and they can interact between them very easily. Yeah, I think it would, maybe the design might change a little bit or something like that, but the underlying idea and approach and information architecture is probably would remain the same.
Got you. Just out of it, what's the map projection that you used, and is that something that you had to be sensitive to?
I think it's just a Mercator projection.
Right.
I think we didn't. No one asked us about the projections, but there were sensitivities around. We weren't allowed any country labels.
Right.
We had to be very careful around boundaries and where we got the boundary file from.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, did the UNDP have their own that you can just resort to?
The UN has one. Yeah.
So you don't have to go through the struggle of the sensitivities around. I mean, what is a country sometimes is not as straightforward as you'd expect it to be. But if they've got that sorted, you can obviously just fall into their slipstream for that.
Yep, exactly.
And actually, a point I forgot to raise earlier on about the data, but you've mentioned now about the sort of sensitivities about political sensitivities, cultural sensitivities. Were there any politics involved in any of the data? I mean, I know that having spoken to someone like John Byrne-Murdoch about his work on the Financial Times tracker, there were data published officially that would be questionable, and then when he speaks to kind of more local correspondents, they will give him a more accurate data file. I know that you weren't necessarily involved in the weeds of that kind of collection side of things, but were you having to just tread a delicate line with any of the data contents from that side of things?
No, we were saved from that a little bit. I think for us, at the end of the day, there was, there is rather a UN data set that defines what they view as the countries. And we use that as our kind of canonical list. Like I said, they also gave us the boundary files, so that was fine. Although we just... so we were shielded from that, and we could always say, oh, we've got data. Sometimes we would have a mismatch of what the data had in it and what the UN country data list would say. And so in that case, we just go, not in the list, so we're not going to show it. And everyone was fine with that.
That's clear cut.
Thank you for joining us for this Explore, Explain highlights episode. As always, the full episode is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. We hope to see you again soon on another episode of Explore, Explain.